Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lunch and Learn with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights and the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. I am Tiana Davis, the Outreach Specialist with the Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. With me as co hosts today are Kyla Hannington, also from the Office of Human Rights, and Dr. Audrey Lau, the Adult and Senior Services Specialist with the library. Lunch and Learn is a joint partnership between our offices and has brought us interesting speakers and topics that help our mission of creating opportunities to build understanding across diverse peoples. We are honored to constantly be joined by such incredible guests, and we're excited to introduce you to today's Lunch and Learn guest, George M. Johnson. George M. Johnson, who uses they them pronouns, is an Emmy nominated, award winning, and best selling Black non binary author and activist. They have written on race, gender, sex, and culture for Essence, The Advocate, BuzzFeed News, Teen Vogue, and more than 40 other national publications. George has appeared on BuzzFeed's AM to DM as well as MSNBC. They are also a proud HBCU alum twice over and a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Their debut memoir, All Boys Aren't Blue, was a New York Times bestseller and garnered many accolades. It was the second most banned book of 2022 in the United States, according to the American Library Association. For their work fighting book bans and challenges, the National Coalition Against Censorship honored George with its Free Speech Defender Award, and Time magazine named them one of the 100 next most influential people in the world. While writing their memoir, George used he, him pronouns. Originally from Plainfield, New Jersey, they now live in Los Angeles, California. Welcome, George. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself and Flamboyants in your own words?
Sure. Well, I'm George M. Johnson. The bio was already read, so I guess introducing myself would be saying that at heart, I am truly an introvert. I live an extroverted life, and I'm okay with that. Most times I am in the house watching reruns of 3 different shows, living single, girlfriends, and I go to sleep. Now I go to sleep to the Golden Girls. About Flamboyants, I found myself after writing All Boys Aren't Blue in particular, getting a lot of messages that were talking about me being inspirational, but also me being like a hero to so many young adults that they could actually look up to, but see like that they could attach themselves to me and through my work and through just how I was able to live my life publicly. And it got me to thinking about how growing up, I didn't really have any heroes, specifically any queer heroes. And it made me want to kind of investigate a little bit more like, well, who should have been my queer heroes? Who should I have been allowed to know about, plus their queer identity? And then at the intersection of knowing who some of the figures were in Flamboyance, like Josephine Baker, like County Cullen, like Langston Hughes, I did know about those individuals when I was younger, but I didn't know about them as queer individuals. And I didn't know that many of the figures in my book were already experiencing, and I had already lived through many of the experiences that I wish I had guidance on, or that I wish I knew someone in the world reflected upon me. And so I find that to be my mission a lot of times, is to restore the history that has been either hidden from us, erased from us, or simply stolen from us. And that was really everything that went into Flamboyance. I wanted to write a love letter to those people who, did something that opened the door or paved the way for me to have the life that I have today, as well as the career that I have today. We know about the Stonewall riots as really the inflection point of the LGBTQ rights movement, but you don't get to the Stonewall riots without the work that was done by so many during the Harlem Renaissance, and just so many of before whose names we'll never know. And so I wanted to kind of offer that as my gift and my love letter back to the world, and also back to them.
Nice. So All Boys Aren't Blue, as we said earlier, has faced book bans since its publication. So in a way, you're a hero being hidden from some up and coming writer or artist or activist out there. And I wanted to bring that up because in your introduction, you mentioned your heroes being hidden from you. What has it been like for you dealing with book bans and censorship?
Okay. So dealing with book bans and censorship, it has been an ongoing fight of my life for the last, I guess, 3 years, 3.5 years in particular with my book. Um, but I think in dealing with it, it kind of gave me a newfound love for the work that I do. It gave me a new missions, new objectives of what I wanted to write about. It taught me the importance of what I was writing about.
Mm-hmm.
I think when history is being made, you're not necessarily doing it to make history. And so this book wasn't being written with a thought in mind that, oh, I want to be a banned author, right? I want to be the first this or the first that. It was written because I knew that there were young adults out there and even adults. Because I say the book is written for two people. It's written for young adults who are here now, but it's also written for those who have been queer for a long time, but still needed a voice for that inner child. And I feel like the book speaks to the inner child of so many people who may be older than the age range that the book was specifically written for. So it's still written for them. But the bans and the censorship, I think it really just honed in on the divisiveness of people, the inhumanity of people. We all are just people at the end of the day, right? And so when you look at, oh, well, we don't want kids or teens or however they phrase it to learn about queer people's existence, their livelihoods or their stories, it's not just saying that, it's realistically saying we don't want your type of people to even exist. Because reading about it in a book, and especially because my book is not fiction, like I'm here, I'm a real person. So when you say, I don't even want them to read about it in a book, that also means you don't even want them to associate with them at work or at school or in life, right? And so I think that's the deeper meaning that I've had to process with the book bans, is that this is not about banning books. This is about a much larger social issue and several intertied oppression issues on a macro level and micro level. And so we have to recognize that the fight can't look like we're just fighting against book bans. It has to look like we are fighting for the preservation of so many other things that the book bans are just tied into, or that the book bans have become a catalyst for. They couldn't remove the books in Florida. They did the Don't Say Gay bill, which essentially removed the books, but also was the first step to removing rights, even more rights. And so we have to look at it like that as well. And so the book bans, for me, it looks like a macro issue, but it is actually a micro issue tied to a much larger macro issue of the removal of rights and the removal of existence of queer people and Black people, essentially.
We did the library and our Office of Human Rights did a book discussion series, a Rock Band book club, where we read the 10 most challenged books of 2022, which was actually 13 because there were ties in there. And so we read All Boys Aren't Blue. And what I will say of having read these 13 books over that 13-month period was that, first of all, if people haven't read them, read these books. They're not, just read them. But the issue of access to information, which is, even if, let's say I personally didn't want to read book X. That's not true, but let's just pretend I didn't. That doesn't mean that it's someone else should decide for you, or that I should decide for you that you should not have access to seeing a story or a information. So we appreciate on the Office of Human Rights side just this access to and putting the words out there and speaking. And also I want to just acknowledge, probably on a personal level, to the fact that telling your story, just as you say, telling the story of your life puts you in a firing line with people. And that is absolutely wrong, but I want to make space for that feeling and that experience.
And I just also want to just add the fact that these books save lives. Like, these books absolutely save lives. And I think for me, reading your first book and then reading this book, I love your voice in in both of those books, but I also really love the fact that you're really reaching out to kids who are just lost, who are trying to figure it out. So many of us have been bullied, but like, I love now that this is like a genre almost, that you get to grow up and talk about the things that inspire you. And I'm still here, and I am worth loving, and worth your time. And because these books are just fantastic. And I just want to thank you for them. Just absolutely thank you, and know that they save lives.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting, the part about it like being its own genre, because that's starting to come up more, even with like on the publishing side, even with like my agent will mention, she's like, people kind of talk about how you kind of created like some new space that we didn't know was needed in YA. And I was like, I didn't think about it like that until after Flamboyants. And of course, I have a second book, We Are Not Broken, as well, which talks about my grandmother's story with says her her 7 grandchildren, because we're all included in the book. But yeah, I didn't go into it like knowing what was missing necessarily in the space. And I remember when we were looking for comps for All Boys Aren't Blue, when we were about to, release the book, and, so that we could say like, oh, it's similar to this and it's similar to that. And I remember just like Macmillan and my publisher, they came back to me and they were like, we can't really find any comps. Like we had like, Lori Hall's Speak and Shout, but it really wasn't anything like it. And we didn't even know it, but none of us went into it not realizing that, right? Like we just assumed like, oh yeah, there's gotta be a queer memoir somewhere in the YA space. And it just wasn't there. And so with doing this work, it has been also about how do we create these new spaces for literature, nonfiction. I was going to say, as most know, most wouldn't know. But in the industry, nonfiction is not, it's a huge seller in the adult space. It's not as big a seller in the YA space. And so it's been amazing to see All Boys Aren't Blue do so well, and to see Flamboyants get 4-star reviews and an Audio Award nomination, and, be doing so well, because it is building out a space, that existed, but it's amplifying a space that needs more light shined on it in the nonfiction world.
So I grew up in Prince George's County. I don't know if you're familiar. I know you're from Virginia. I don't know which part, but predominantly Black county.
Yeah.
And so one of the benefits I think of growing up here was that I've had mostly Black teachers all throughout my K through 12 years. And so, we definitely had the teachers who were like, well, we're going to teach you the history they don't want you to know. Right. And so even with all that, with that being my history, it was so shocking to me reading this, that there were names in this book that I had not heard of before. Or, there was one, I think it was, let me see, Gladys Bentley. I'd seen her photo before, but I didn't know anything about her.
Yes.
How did you choose who to include in this, and how did you find them and research them? And
yeah, the great thing about the Harlem Renaissance is that it, in my opinion, was one of the first periods around queerness that was archived well. Prior to that, we have some things, but we don't have a lot of information around. And even when we talk about just like slavery in this country, like there isn't a lot of, it's hard to find any stories about like what queer slaves dealt with, right? Or what was queerness during slavery, right? And so the Harlem Renaissance was really a critical time where Alain Locke primarily, made it his mission to make sure that the writings, the art, the culture was written, performed, and preserved, so that we would be able to reflect upon it in the future. I think once I started doing the research of just the Harlem Renaissance itself, one, even for me, I learned that the Harlem Renaissance isn't just about Harlem, right? I mean, I think growing up, because it's called the Harlem Renaissance, it is taught very Harlem, New York centric, but it really was an expansive movement throughout the South, primarily, that just had very strong ties to Harlem. and again, it was about Harlem too, but it really was expansive, right? When you think about like Bessie Smith and some of the other characters in the book, they were primarily Southern performers, but their culture, you know, was helped influence what the Harlem culture zeitgeist was in totality. And so that's where the research kind of took me. I had to take myself out of the notion that if these characters didn't live in Harlem or exist in Harlem, that they weren't part of this Renaissance. And so that was how the research for me happened, right? And so a lot of help comes from people like Elaine Locke and specifically Langston Hughes, because Langston Hughes was very, not just integral himself, but he was tied to so many people. And he wrote about several other people. Like, he worked with them, but he also would write reviews about them or talk about them publicly. And like, all of that information was recorded. And so just in reading Langston Hughes's writings, it helped me to find other people who I may not have known about. Like Richard Bruce Nugent. Even though I knew about Bruce Nugent, I didn't necessarily know he was a Renaissance writer. I always knew he was a writer. I knew about his connections to DC, but I never knew how he fit into the Renaissance. And so Langston Hughes was really like one of those guiding forces. And then, of course, Elaine Locke with The New Negro, because I was able to look at, well, who were the collection of artists in this book? And then as I was researching them, I was able to find more stories about their identities and finding out their queerness. And that's kind of how it helped me compile everything together.
I guess, can I just follow up? My love of this book is the fact that it comes in multiple formats, and the fact that I was able to read it, appreciate the artwork, appreciate the poetry, the writing, and then I could put it on my audiobook and like kind of be introduced like to all these new. And I spent some time in Mississippi, 10 years, and the blues were something I knew about, but the Harlem Renaissance is that era that is so brilliant and so full of color, and you've done that, and it's really great. I just want to, can you talk a little bit about the process of turning this into the actual book and the because the art, I mean, it's just beautiful. It is a gorgeous book.
This one was hard because I have a very interesting mind, I guess a very interesting brain, and I see things. And so when I see things like in my mind, I'm like, okay, I can see this, but now how do I turn this into what I can see in my head? And so sometimes when I go to my agent with things, she's always like, love it, let's go for it. When you then get it to the publisher, it's tough because you have to kind of get them to see what you can only see because it's in your imagination, it's in your mind. And so I had always seen the book like this, but it was not like the easiest of journey because you have to get other people to see your vision that you haven't been able to like really put on paper yet. I knew from the day that I met Charlie Palmer and he created the All Boys Aren't Blue cover, which I knew what I wanted that cover to look like. And he was able to, in my opinion, he was one of the first artists that was able to listen to what I was saying, read my words, and exactly know what I was thinking in my mind art-wise. And I knew that for a project of this undertaking where I wanted to memorialize them in portraiture, that it was him that I knew that would be able to read it and be like, okay, I know exactly what the image is that George has in their mind of these figures. And so we worked together, and when he sent the first set of sketches, it was spot on exactly what I thought this book should look like. Funny enough, though, I changed the cover. So the real cover of the book is the first page of the book. That's the actual cover that Charlie created for the book. Yes. So that was the cover Charlie created, which I love. But once we went through the final images and I saw that image of Josephine Baker, I made an executive decision to switch it. And it was funny because when Charlie saw the cover of the book for the first time, he said he wasn't upset, but he just was confused because he was like, did they not like what I made? And so when he texted me, I was like, oh no, actually that was me who switched it, because I just thought that picture of Josephine Baker was so iconic that you created that it had to be the cover. And so that was one thing. And then on the writing side, it was really hard because I had to figure out how I wanted to write this book. I didn't want it to just straight be biographical. So I wanted to infuse myself, my own stories intertwined within it. So that was tough. And then as you go through revisions and rounds, it's like we got to a place where it was like the book is done, but it's still missing some type of magic to it, the thing that I bring to my writing. And so I had to kind of sit back and be like, okay, what am I trying to do with this book? And I think what I came to the realization was like, I was too focused on writing about the Harlem Renaissance when I wanted the book to be the Harlem Renaissance. And I took a step back and I did a full rewrite of the book, using most of the information that was in it still, but I did a full rewrite. And that's when I decided to write poetry. And that's when I decided to kind of make some of the stories a little bit more essay. I wanted it to kind of be the new version of the New Negro 100 years later, my interpretation of it. And so that was really the process for me. And I think that's really when the magic sparked off, because now the book is art, right? Itself. It's an art project. It's poetry. It is everything that the Harlem Renaissance was wrapped into one text. And like you said, if you're a writer, you get the writing. So like if you're a journalism student or a writing student, a creative writing student, you get the writing. If you're a fine arts major, you get the artwork of Charlie Palmer. And then if you are even in the audio space and you listen to the book, it has music set to it. It has a different cadence to it. So this book is transferable for so many different types of the creative arts. And that's ultimately what I wanted to do. I wanted it to be a total package of art. And I think we accomplished that.
We actually have a student question. They said, how can students become encouraged to write and illustrate on this level from a teenage perspective? What's the first step?
Good question. How can students become encouraged to write? I think the first thing is when you have a story in mind, to not get caught up in the small details. I think we are looking for perfection in writing a lot of times. We're looking to get it right the first time. And something I've learned and something I go into really, really hard now. Sometimes it pisses people off. But my first draft is my first draft. And that means I may not have even spell checked it before I turned it in. Like, it is a first draft, right? And so I go into it knowing that my first draft of something, it needs to be decent and polished, but it is just that. I needed to get these thoughts on paper so that I could then do the hard work, which is the editing, the revisions, right? I always say, like, that's the heart of anything, is when you get those notes back, that's when the real work starts, because that's when your brain really gets going. That first draft is just, you got to get it out and get it on paper. So the encouragement to write is essentially your body your body is carrying those words with you. And so until you take them from body to paper, there's going to be a weight to you. And the only way to release that weight is to put those words down. And that sense of accomplishment from putting those words down is the encouragement that you need, essentially. I think when it comes to illustrating, I'm not an illustrator, but because I do work closely with Charlie Palmer and have so now for several years, I think art is about interpretation. Like, when it comes to illustrating is about the interpretation of somebody's words or how someone's words make you feel. But I do think if you are an illustrator, and there have been so many beautiful renditions done of the All Boys Aren't Blue book cover. I find it fascinating how so many artists could read that book, and each version of the cover that they do are all different. And I think that's the beauty of art. It is what your interpretation of the illustration looks like. It's what your interpretation of the words and how they make you feel when you sketch them down, when you make your sketches. And so I think it's really about being in tune with the writing, especially if you're doing illustrating for someone else's writing, being in tune with who that person is, what they see, but also being in tune with yourself about the interpretation of the art and how it makes you feel. Whether you want the art to be more modern, because we could have went a modern direction with the art, but I knew what I wanted it to look like because I knew what the entire book needed to encapsulate. And so there has to be some type of synergy there if you're an illustrator for someone else's words. If you're an illustrator for your own words, I think there's even more power in how you want your images to appear on your pages for the words that you write.
So Dr. Stewart, who is the person who put that question in, has got this follow-up that I want to make sure that you see, that Dr. Stewart's students have wanted her to say that they are so into this Lunch and Learn. So they're really appreciating this. And we appreciate
I was going to say,
I have a quick question, but Tiana, I'll throw it back at you. But I wanted to talk, you said when you were giving your introduction, you talked about the banning of All Boys Aren't Blue, and you said something about being like the first in different spaces, and that had me thinking about Ethel Waters.
Yes.
And I have actually sort of two questions, but I'm going to run them together and then we'll sort it out. You had talked about her as the second Black woman to be nominated for Academy Award, and you note many of us know that Hattie McDaniel being the first Black woman to be nominated for an Academy Award, but do we know the second person? And you went on from there to say, when do we get to a point where there are so many Black people achieving historic success that the order in which they do it isn't even a thing anymore, that it's my goal to find my success and help others do the same. And I was really impacted by that and what you're doing. And I hope that I feel like but you clearly are doing that. You are making that space and you're creating that. And you hear this from the student comments and from the feedback that you're getting. And just about and thinking about this as it relates to power and how it can be in a space where in white supremacy or homophobia, misogyny, that in these places, these combinations of oppressive forces that strip power, that how you are still showing so much power, and all the people in this book, like their voices and the way that they use their voices and their art to find power in places where power was people were trying to strip power from them. And so I kind of want to talk about all of that as much as you'd like to talk about.
Yeah. It's just interesting, to live in a country where there are still first Black person to achieve something, right? And I think we used to, at least when I was growing up, that used to be like a big deal to us, right? Like, oh my God, like we finally did it, right? And I think though, Obama becoming president in many ways shifted how we have to look at Black firsts, right? Because one, and I wrote about this even back in All Boys Aren't Blue about symbolism, how realistically what symbolism means, and being a Black first is like it's supposed to be like a symbol of something, but really what it really means is like it's not about how hard you had to fight to become the first, it's about how long someone blocked you from achieving it. And I think that's where the mindset has now shifted in many ways when we think about these historic things that happen when you're the first person to do something. It's like, well, it wasn't because, in most cases, it's not because I should have been the first. It's because, Langston Hughes should have been the first, or so-and-so should have been the first, or this one, or this one, or this one, or this one. So it's like, once you get it, it's like, it's not because I did something harder than them, or I fought harder than them, or I lived in a time that was even harder than theirs, right? And so it's like, I have to take all of that into the thought process of it. And then it's like, once you become that, how do you, as the person, ensure that there's a second or a third or a fourth? Or how do you ensure that so many come after you that the number doesn't matter anymore, right? when a white actress wins sorry, I'm in LA, so if y'all hear sirens, I'm in downtown. That's just part of our daily downtown sirens. But when a white actress wins Best Actress at the Oscars, the headline isn't going to say 57th white woman to win it's not going to say that, right? But when a black woman finally wins an Oscar again for Best Actress, it will say in every story and in every headline that she's the second to do it, right? So it's like, it's like the goal for me has never been just about being a first or a second, like a historic feat, right? Because realistically, it speaks more volumes about the people, the systems, and the other things that block us from those achievements than it is about me gaining recognition for that specific achievement. All Boys Aren't Blue has been number 2 on the Banned Book list for the last 2 years, because it was 3 in 2021, 2 in 2022, 2 again, but inching very close to 1 in 2023. And the 2024 list will be out in a couple weeks. So we don't know. But, should All Boys Aren't Blue end up at the top of that list, I have to process, what does this really mean? What does this, because it will be seen as an achievement in some ways, even though it is nefarious that this is what we are going through. But essentially, is there a silver lining in this? Does the success of this book, despite the banning of the book, because the book was very successful pre-book banning, does the success of this book allow for there to be an All Girls Aren't Pink? Does the success of this book allow for there to be the queer young adult memoir of a Black kid from the South? Because I'm from Jersey originally. I did go to college in Virginia, but like, does this then allow for there to be the YA queer memoir of the Black kid from the Midwest, right? Like, that's what my ultimate goal has to be. It shouldn't be that 10 years from now, All Boys Aren't Blue is still the standard bearer. It could be the standard bearer of the genre if that's the case, but there should be more books within that, right? Like, there should be more queer YA memoirs by that point, so that it is a collection that other people's voices are seen, because my book can't speak for everyone. And so that has to be my goal. My goal can't be like to make sure that my book stays the standard or stays the book of everything. And so whether I do become, one of the first Black queer authors to top the banned book list or not, the work that I have to do is to ensure that more stories like mine continue to get told, and using whatever comes from it to open doors for others, and not allow myself to be trapped in the box that society wants my book to be trapped in, and also me to be trapped in.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Deanna.
Okay. So in the Claude McKay chapter, there's a quote: "If I must die, it won't be in silence." And, earlier in the book, you wrote something to the effect of there not being any power in oppression. And I feel like this quote sort of counters that, right? Like, there's no capital P power. But like, I feel like there's some power in going down swinging, right? Can you talk about just, I guess, the dichotomy between those two beliefs?
Do you have the full quote of the power and oppression? I just want to make sure I'm not taking it out of context. If you have the...
Kylie, do you remember what chapter that was in?
I just want to make sure before I answer it that I'm fully aware of what the sentence is.
Are you looking for the Claude McKay part or
the power? There's no power in oppression.
Okay, yeah, I'll find that.
I just want to make sure I'm answering it properly with whatever context of a passage that I may have written.
Okay. I'm just doing a fast skim. We can see how well I do.
I was gonna say, only because what I deal with unfortunately with the book bans, and this is the reason that I make sure I ask this even with public interviews, is because with the book bans, what they tend to do is they will take just a sentence of a passage or 2 sentences of one of my passages, but not give what happened before and what happened after, would change the context of how I meant something. And so I just want to make sure before I speak, like what I was getting at.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest, if I may, Tiana, can you go to another question, or Audrey? And I'm going to just try to find this quote, and then when we're done with that one, I'll come back to this.
All right, cool. Thank you.
I can ask one if you want, real quick. I guess one of the things that I really love about this book, and it's as a historian, it's something that I wish I could get into the heads of my students when I've taught, is that it's okay to engage in people from the past and like kind of shake them almost and like ask them, why did you do this? What are you doing? And I guess what is it about that that's so scary to some people? That it's not, I get accused a lot of knocking people off pillars, and that's not what it is. It's bringing them down to like real life and saying, this person is a person and they struggled with these things. Can you just kind of just briefly talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's part of an indoctrination, that you have respect for the dead or you have respect for the deceased. But it goes very, very far. The indoctrination really goes to like almost you cannot speak ill of the dead. And I've seen people even say that, and it's like, but that's not the reality, right? If a person did something in the past that wasn't okay, we have every right to critique it. I think the biggest thing is when you make the criticism of a person from the past, make sure you're telling the full context of what the existence of the past was, right? I think that's where people make their mistake, because it's like, if I'm going to critique Zora Hurston, or if I'm going to critique Josephine Baker, for instance, right? It's like also understanding what her life looked like and what the existence of queer rights were, which were none. So you have to go into it, making sure that you talk about the totality of it and how the mindset could have even become for that person to have to make a decision like that. I also go into it knowing that there are certain decisions that other races never have to make, right? Like there are just certain decisions that Black people have to make that another entity or person, another human being would never have to even think about making, right? I think about Toni Morrison's Beloved, and I think about it being, not just a book, but a Black horror story, and not a horror story with Black characters, but an actual Black horror story, because the decision that the mother has to make of either killing her child or allowing her child to live in slavery is one that only a Black person could make. A white person could never, during that time, understand what that even meant. You would never, that decision is never even posed to you. That is a decision, that is a horror that a Black person could only face, right? And so when you go into and I love that character in particular and using that trope in particular, because you're going to get so many opinions of I would have kept my child versus, or I wouldn't have let my child live. You're going to get it from both sides. But at the end of the day, some decisions aren't even about choice, right? There's, they say, what is the decision between a rock and a hard place, or choosing the lesser two evils? What does that even mean when those are the two options, right? And so I think when I am critical of the past, I go into it though with the lens of what the past was, what the existence was, what the mindset had to be, and that either choice could have been horrible, right? Like there was no choice that was better. Like this wasn't about a 51-49. It wasn't about, it was just unimaginable, right? And so even and it's funny because people will be like, oh, that's so unimaginable. And it's like, but have you ever really thought what that word means? The ability to not even be able to use your imagination, like the ability for your imagination to be cut off. So you can't even dream of a future without slavery, or you can't even dream of think of what your life would be like without your child, because your imagination has cut off. And so you're just making a real decision in real time. And so when I'm critical of the past, I think about that. I think about the totality of it. It's easy to criticize a past being using current standards. That's the easy part. It's much harder to put yourself in their shoes and have to make the same decision under whatever the laws were, the circumstances were, and the times were. And so I try to make sure that I'm very, very inclusive of that. And I think a lot of people are afraid to criticize people from the past and whatever, because they don't want to do that hard work of having to go into an imaginative space of what you would have done if you lived under those circumstances, and really immersing yourself in the circumstances that they lived
Uh,
Did you find it?
Yeah, so there's I think what I'm looking for is there's a quote in the County Cullen. Am I saying that right? County Cullen?
Some say county, but I believe it's pronounced County.
County Cullen. So we actually have a few questions that we want to talk about this section. But I think the quote we were talking about was, there's a part where you're writing about his work. He believed race relations between whites and blacks needed to improve, but placed some of the burden on black folks, as if to say our assimilation into American identity was as important or more important than owning our Negro identity. I don't believe the oppressed are responsible for fixing relations with their oppressor. We are not the creators of racism, nor do we have power within racist structures. We shouldn't be extend an olive branch to fix it. And I think where Tiana was talking about with the power part was that phrase of the power within racist structures.
Yes.
And because that was something that I kind of, in my question about Ethel, when I was asking about Ethel Waters, was also this way in which we see people with such limited, or that the society is trying to like remove power or oppress or make it very difficult, and yet people finding ways to subvert that and exercise power.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, now that I know, okay, I can better answer that. Yes. My notion I still fight knowing I have no power in certain situations. So I think it's two things can be true. I go into a lot of situations knowing I have no power to necessarily change this, but it doesn't stop me from fighting and trying. I think, though, that when I was talking about that quote in particular about, having no power within oppression, it is the notion that it should be my job to fix an oppressor, that it should be my job to fix an oppressive system. That is not an obligation that, we have to be burdened with necessarily, right? Like, it shouldn't be the job of the oppressed to have to fix an oppressive situation. When you get to Claude McKay, I think Claude McKay is speaking more to change doesn't happen peacefully, right? And so I think they're both speaking to, they are contrary, because Conte, again, was more we are the world in his writing, right? Like more trying to like be a little bit more similarist within certain things. Whereas Claude was very clear about, no, we cannot be silent, and sometimes our silence, or sometimes our silence will always end in death. However, our fight may end in death, but the fight is what is most important, right? That you fight against these things. And so, do the oppressed have power within oppressive systems? We don't, right? Like, we don't have that. But it doesn't mean that we don't fight against them, right? You don't cower to the fact of that. But us as a group can't just go and make something happen immediately, right? And so I think it's a double-edged sword, right? It's about, well, what do we have, right? What can we do? How do we make this change? And so I totally agree I'm more Claude McKay with it, because I fight every day, right? Like, if I didn't believe that I had power to fight against book bans and, or didn't have the strength or courage or whatever it takes for me to fight against book bans, and if I truly just believed that, well, I don't have any power in this, so I can't do nothing to fix it, then I would have walked away, right? And I would have sat silent, but I don't. But I do understand how oppression works. And as a group, you know, even when you look at electoral politics, you know, Black people aren't looked at as a full vote. We're looked at as a swing voting block, a block that people hope will swing far enough one way that it stops oppressors from getting what they could easily get because they outnumber us. Right. And so when I talk about it in that way, it's like, do we have power in voting? Yes. But realistically, if all white people aligned and voted one way, there's nothing we could there's not enough of us. It doesn't mean that we've just made the decision though to the cower and be like, all right, well, they all voted this way, let's go back to slavery, because we're not doing that either. But at the same time, it is about recognizing what you actually have in certain circumstances, and then going about what your fight looks like with the understanding of how alignment works, how oppression works, and how these systems work. Because again, like a 4-star general just got replaced with a lieutenant who was the top, right? You see what I'm saying? And so it's like, that looked like he had power, right? It gave the image of this is the most powerful joint chief, and someone took it away just like that. So did he really ever have power in that oppressive system of what we call the defense? And what did he ever really have it? Or did it just look like he had it? And so I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at, was like, do we really have power when we enter an oppressive system? Does that really exist? It's like when a Black person becomes a police chief. You are the most powerful person in your department, or you could be the most powerful police chief in your state. But when they flip a switch and remove you and place someone white above you, did you ever really have it? Or did it just look like you had it, right? And so I think that's kind of where I was getting at with that. And that's why the fight has to look different. We have to recognize what the actual fight is versus what it's not. And I'll end on this, you know, I know we're not supposed to get super political on things, but I hate when people tell me like, oh, but can we not make it too political, as if my life is not politics, as if my book has not become a political situation. And so I always am just like, well, no, because my existence right now is political. My book and my name has been said at a Senate Judiciary hearing, read aloud for the world to see. So no, I am political because my whole existence right now is political. But when I first heard you say that quote, it made me think about how the minority speaker of the House has just basically been like, well, we really don't have any power right now. And it's like, well, yes, that's true on paper, because you don't, because they have all 3 chambers. But please don't sit and tell me that there's nothing you can do. And that's what I was getting at, was we can understand, you are absolutely right. In an oppressive system as this is, y'all don't have power because you don't have the majority of votes and you don't have the chambers. But that doesn't mean you still don't Claude McKay, which is you still can do something even when you know you don't have the power. That's what I think I was trying to connect with. That was, we have to understand, yes, we do not have this and this and this, while also understanding you still fight though. And there are still things you can do even when you don't have the power. I think that's the best way I can put that all together.
I think that is, and I'm just gonna highlight this comment because I think there's something we all need to think about, right? You may not have power, but that does not mean that there is nothing that you can do. There are still things to do.
Yes.
Yeah. We have some couple questions from audience members. I'm just going to share really quickly. First of all, I want to just give a shout out to the students out there. We have several different classes who join us, and I just want you students to know that we love that you are here with us and we value you, and we're so glad. And so one of the students says, just like there is power in our race, how can we assert our power through our sexuality?
That's a good question. Assert power through our sexuality. Okay, I'm going to try and answer it with what I think they're saying through sexuality, because I just want to make sure, because I feel like students are smart enough to know the difference between like sexuality, gender identity, and all of the different things. But if I think what you're getting at is freedom of expression, is what I'm hoping that you're getting at. I feel like for me, and for several others in our community, that the power of like what our sexuality is and how we define ourselves is by going against societal norms while understanding the dangers of going against those norms. My friend Deshaun Harrison created a shirt that says, to be, I believe it says, to be publicly Black and queer is to choose my happiness over my safety. That is really the essence of what it is. I make a conscious decision when I decide to put on my heels, throw on my lashes, and walk red carpets, when I wear clothes that are deemed not for a person of my body type and all of those things. And so finding power in my sexuality and my identity has really been about doing micro abolition work, in a sense, right? It's like on a macro level, you know, we can talk about these issues, but on a micro level, it's about what city do you live in? What town do you live in? And the fear that comes with the freedom of your expression of yourself. And we all have to make a decision of our safety. And so I always tell people, you know, it really does come down to safety and how far you're willing to go to be okay with yourself and understand that these consequences come with it. I'm not a person that, because I hate when people say like, it'll get better. You know, there was a whole campaign, you know, many, many years ago. I'm aging myself a little bit, but many, many years ago, they used to do this campaign, like, it'll get better. Like, it'll get better.
Yeah.
And it's like, but no, it doesn't. For so many, it doesn't, right? And I'm the person who is going to tell the truth. Like, no, it doesn't get better for some of us, right? It gets harder. I have so many trans friends. I'm in ballroom. I have trans kids. I have, you know, it doesn't get better. But my job as a public figure and the work that I do is I fight to make it better for other people. But I go into the power of my sexuality, the power of my identity, knowing that I could be harmed for it, knowing that I could be killed for it. And Toni Morrison, there was a recent video of her talking about how she hates that people have made art, like people will say like, oh, art is beautiful. And she's like, no, art is bloody. Artists get killed all the time. Writers get attacked all the time. Writers have been, you know, hung, beheaded. She said, it is bloody, it is dangerous, it is the bloody sport, but that's what it is. And when you go into creating art, we know that the art we create shifts culture, shifts mindsets, and creates wars, changes so many minds and values and things that's a lot of power that you have with that. So it can be a bloody thing to have to do, because when people know that your words can transform so many people, they will do anything in their power to stop you from being able to continue to put words in the world. And so I think about that with my writing. I think about that with my identity, but I definitely think about that with my sexuality. I am very open about it. I'm very public about it, and I'm unapologetic about it. Still understanding that I know that my happiness has been chosen over my safety. And so if anything else happened to me, if something ever happened to me, the world will know, though, I chose happiness over and freedom over societal conformity.
That was great. Thank you so much for that answer. There's another, we actually have two more audience questions. I know we're coming to time, but I'm going to try and get them in. One of them, we have Ms. Vivian is hoping that you can go into a little bit more detail about why you wrote the book.
Flamboyants?
Yeah.
Flamboyants?
Yeah.
Okay. Why did I write Flamboyants? I wrote Flamboyants primarily because of the notion that my heroes were stolen from me or hidden from me. Because I had gotten so many emails about me being someone's hero. Like I said, it made me think about, well, who were mine and where were they? Like, did they exist? And so I wanted to make sure that I found out who my heroes should have been. The second reason is because I do believe in the idea of Sankofa, which is basically looking back to our past in order to help us understand the path towards our future. And because I was dealing with book bans and because I was dealing with so much, I was like, I'm not the first to deal with this. So like, it's important for me to go back into the past and see what were the social criticisms of my ancestors and the people who came before me, and how did they deal with it to help me navigate the space that I'm in today? And it has in many ways, because I watched what they did, how they did it, how they moved, how they navigated, and it has given me a newfound awareness of self and my own identity, but just it's given me a blueprint in many ways of how I want to continue this fight moving forward, because I watched what they did and how they did it. And so I now know what I have to do and what I must do moving forward. I've been highly critical of many things, but I haven't taken it to the place that Toni Morrison ever took it, Angela Davis ever took it, James Baldwin ever took it, Alain Locke ever took it. I haven't, Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, I have not allowed myself to be as critical of systems and things and people in America as I should have been. And so now I know that's my next step. I have done the self-work with All Boys Aren't Blue. I have done the macro family work with We're Not Broken. And now I've done my historical work with Flamboyants. And so now it's time for me to do my current work. And that is, I have to talk about this time period we are in now because it has to be preserved.
Thank you. Thank you. And that, yeah. On that, I am going to say, unfortunately, we are out of time. I know we didn't get to all the questions, and we certainly didn't get to all of our questions. We have many more pages to go. But George, I can't accurately express really for all three of us what a tremendous honor it has been to have you join us. As I said before, we loved All Boys Aren't Blue, and this book is such a celebration. It's such a way of honoring the extraordinary people who came before. So thank you for the work that you did to remind us of their voices, their vision, and their lives. For those of you watching at home, the absolute best way to support George is by buying their books. Yes. And this book is so beautiful. We talked a little bit about it, the images, the colors, the poems. I mean, really, the book itself is art, and you've heard that the audiobook too with the music. Like, however you are able to experience this book is an incredible artistic gift. So you can buy it from your favorite independent bookstore, and if that's not something you're ready to do right now, but you love to read it, you can get it from your local library system. We love libraries, and our friends Prince George's County Memorial Library System can definitely hook you up with this if you are local to us. We do appreciate you joining us, whether you're watching with us right now or you're joining us on demand later. You are why we do what we do. So thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with us. We have a couple other really great things coming up. I'm just going to take a really quick second to let you know about. Next week's Lunch and Learn is live only. So it is with Dr. Kurt Gray to talk about his new book, Outrage, Why We Fight About Morality and Politics and How to Find Common Ground. It's an extraordinary and extraordinarily timely book. And again, it's only going to be live. So please join us next week. And next week, we also have an in-person event on Wednesday, March 5th at the Laurel Branch Library as Amanda Gross presents her call to action book, White Women Get Ready. So you can learn about those and all of our upcoming events by going to civilrights.mypgc.us or going to the library at pgcmls.events. And again, George, thank you so much. Best wishes to all of you for a wonderful day. And when we find all those voices to celebrate and to uplift. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.